This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I am Yves Engler coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And this is, I guess, a happy Labor Day. I'm not sure that Labor Day is a good thing, considering everywhere else it's May 1st. They do the Labor Day commemoration, but the depoliticized thing here in North America, even though it was actually, of course, Chicago in 1886, where May Day came out of, with the killing of a bunch of anarchists fighting for the 8-hour day. So Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a weekly critical look at Canada's role abroad. I'm going to try to get out by 7 tonight, do a proper hour. So I'll get to stuff and hopefully going to make this no more than 30, 35 minutes. The first thing I wanted to mention, I think I meant to mention it last week, but I didn't really, was this whole question of Canada and apartheid South Africa. So Le Devoir has an article this week that said Brian Mulroney s'est battu comme un diable contre l'eau bénite pour forcer l'Afrique du Sud à mettre fin à son régime raciste. Where I Google translated it was Brian Mulroney fought like hell to force South Africa to end its racist regime. And when she was in South Africa, maybe 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago now, Foreign Minister Joly had a post kind of in this same kind of direction. And she put in the post that Canada was a leading force against apartheid South Africa. And that's kind of repeated regularly. But it's like basically like if you just think about it for 3 seconds, the idea that Canada led the fight against apartheid South Africa, like compared to who, right? Which is like compared to Ghana, Nigeria, Congo, Jamaica, India. Like what, when you just think about it, does anyone really believe that Canada was like more against the apartheid South African regime than all these other mostly black or Indonesia, India, other mostly non-white countries? Like, let alone the white Soviet bloc, right? It makes no sense when you think about it for like a couple seconds, but it's stated repeatedly. And here you have this notion, and you know, as I've stated many, many times before, it is fair to say that Mulroney was better than Thatcher and Reagan, right? And so he did push the, like, so that's true. So if you accept the box of where Canada is in the geopolitical order, it's close alignment with the U.S. empire, it's white supremacy, Five Eyes, NATO, da 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 da, then yes, it's fair to say that Canada pushed for apartheid regime to fall. But that's not really saying all that much. So about a week ago, the AMLO, the outgoing, very popular Mexican president, announced a pause in relations with the US and Canada, Canadian embassies. He referred to Canada almost seems like an associate state of the US. And basically, the US and Canadian ambassadors have gone public with criticism of this judicial reform that is taking place in Mexico. And it is very clearly quite a substantive judicial reform. I don't think anyone's doubting this. It's basically making almost all, if not all, of the judiciary elected across the country. And there's apparently only a couple other countries that come close to this degree of sort of electoralism with judges. The U.S., in fact, is one of them that has a not complete, but has a fairly significant amount of elected judge positions. And AMLO is pretty openly saying this is about that. A couple of things, I think. One is that the judiciary is totally controlled by what he refers to as a conservative bloc. And the other part is that it's viewed as very corrupt and sort of easily influenced by, I think, from like, the narco kind of world to just, business interests and stuff like that. I don't obviously don't know much about the Mexican judicial system. But because his party won more than two-thirds in the recent elections, they have the ability to actually move forward with this quite substantive judicial reform. And but it's eliciting this backlash. And basically, the idea here, it's all over the U.S. Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, others are talking about this quite a bit, and they're all saying basically that it's going to threaten U.S. capitalist interests in Mexico. And there's lots that come out of this. The question of we talk about foreign interference endlessly in this country, and here you have the U.S. and Canadian ambassadors very openly interfering in a domain that really is kind of quintessentially domestic affair, right? Like how the judicial system works in Mexico is really not the responsibility or it shouldn't really matter to Canadian politicians. But I think like from the U.S. and Canadian government's perspective, what they see this as doing as weakening the power of North American capital in influencing affairs in Mexico, and I think that's also what AMLO sees this. The reason why he sees doing this as important is because it's about weakening the power of these sort of wealthy corporate interests, as well as more, like the narco or whatever kind of interests, even more corrupt interests over Mexican affairs. And so this intervention is whether this is the right mechanism of organizing the judiciary in Mexico, I don't really know. I don't pretend to have any particular insight in that. The idea of electing judges, the idea that this is like anti-democratic seems a little bit hard to argue, which is what they have been arguing. This is a real threat to Mexican democracy. What this is, I think, certainly from AMLO's perspective, they're being blocked repeatedly from moving forward with their agenda by the judiciary, and so this is a way to change that and to move forward with their agenda. So from the Canadian government, the hypocrisy of the interference, kind of foreign interference claims, is certainly once again noted on this issue. The Financial Times had a front page piece, I think on Wednesday or Thursday. Top defense contractors poised for a $52 billion cash bonanza as orders soar. So this is another, many headlines saying this, but this is further confirmation of just how well these arms companies have been doing. So they've really got the double whammy. The NATO proxy war has been very good for them over the past couple of years, and now the slaughter in Gaza has also been good. I'm sure people saw this. Business of Americans have sent 500 airlifts of weaponry to Israel. 107. This is as of, I guess, a week or 2 weeks ago. 107 boats filled of weaponry to Israel. So this is obviously very good for the arms companies. On the counter to that, this weekend there was the long-standing Canadian International Air Show. I'm not sure what the actual formal title is. Basically, the Toronto Air Show, and there was a fairly significant pushback this year, bigger than I think most years. Good op-ed in the Toronto Star, a protest that looked like it was a few hundred people. They did a direct action at the I guess the CNE, where they threw leaflets off they got on the rides and they threw like anti-air show leaflets from the, I guess, the whatever, the Ferris wheel or way up, and people who were just milling about there saw the leaflets come down. So that's a little bit of a pushback to the militarism that dominates. And the air show, of course, there's fighter jets. It goes back a long history of tied in to the Canadian Air Force and the like. So these air shows are always or almost always quite connected. In fact, the Canadian historically the Royal Canadian Air Force is really what kind of got the air shows going. They instigated as a way to build support for um, um, the Air Force. Uh, so on a different part of the geopolitical world, there's the Filipino and Chinese vessels rammed each other in the South China Sea. That's a bubbling geopolitical hotspot, and Americans are, of course, growing their military presence in the Philippines. Canada has been deepening its military relationship with the Philippines, and so there's a dynamic playing out there that is certainly important to follow. The Toronto Star had a piece which was basically kind of saying from a very liberal establishment kind of perspective that this sort of deepening Canada-U.S. Military or Canada-U.S. relations, including specifically the U.S. military's role in funding Canadian mining. He was basically saying how little attention it's getting and how surprising that is. It turns out the U.S. Department of the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon, in fact, is investing American tax dollars in Canadian mining ventures. So far, it's put up just over 26 million US into 3 projects. The latest one announced last week. It involves developing cobalt sulfate refining facility in northern Ontario. And it is right. We've talked about this. This is, it's around. It's certainly being talked about in the business pages. But the idea that the U.S. military is funding Canadian mining projects is it's a pretty substantive development that's not really getting that much attention. And the rationale, of course, is China and the China having control or influence or of a disproportionate amount of strategic minerals. And so the U.S. military is starting to fund projects in Canada, which these are grants, and they don't actually get anything in the short term. It's only if some event arises. So they're quite lucrative for the mining companies, my understanding. So they basically sign on to an agreement that they're not selling to the US military necessarily in the short term. They get money from the US military, but it's only if something happens that then the US military becomes they're required to sell US military still, I think, for market prices and whatnot, but they get first, the US military would get first dibs. So it's a lucrative thing. One of the projects is very controversial here in Quebec. There's been huge local opposition to the project. But this issue is an interesting one. It also speaks to just an incredible relationship between Canada and the US military, right? This is something that's quite beneficial to Canadian capital, Canadian mining. Yeah. The Globe had a piece about this sort of worry about US elections and Canada's how we'll do and all that. And in this piece, they interview the former Canadian ambassador in the US, McNaughton, I'm forgetting his first name. And the story says the federal government needs to offer cooperation with the White House on its priorities at the same time that it's asking for some concessions for Canada. For example, he said Canada could look at options such as helping with problems in Haiti or Venezuela. So it's putting out really explicitly, the way we will be okay with a Harris administration or a second Trump administration is by offering to help out with problems like Haiti or Venezuela. And we know that's happened in the past, of course. It's remarkable that this stuff is just sort of stated openly, and there's not really there's very little pushback. The NDP almost none of this kind of stuff really gets this pushback of Canada's integration with the U.S. empire. Last week or previously, we talked about the Adam Zivo affair. There was a very good story in Press Progress about Adam Zivo, National Post reporter who did some bizarre sting operation with Ukrainian the SUB, the Ukrainian intelligence agency, where some guy speaks English loudly at an Odessa mall, and so for some reason he thinks the guy's a Chinese spy. So he has a dinner with the guy and his wife, and then he asks the Ukrainian intelligence to listen into this dinner. Nothing comes of this, but it's all a bizarre story of how close this Canadian journalist is to Ukrainian intelligence. And Dmitry Laskaris points out that, as far as I'm aware, no one in Canada's mainstream media has shown an interest in covering this story, which raises a question: how many more Adam Zivos are there out there? And I think the answer to it, of course, is there's lots of Canadian mainstream corporate journalists, international correspondents that do something similar to this, right? And I do have a piece that I submitted to Canadian Dimension, kind of going over the history of this and all these examples of Canadian journalists who are close to the military, close to intelligence, in international affairs. And I'm just drawing from my 2016 book, A Propaganda System. But this is not uncommon. There's a long history of this. And so Zivo boasting about this online in 2024 seems a little bit dumb. It seems a little imprudent. But the underlying issue of that's how international correspondents operate is not really that surprising. On the Ukraine question, so the Globe had a editorial saying the moment to stop Putin is now. Right? They've been basically saying that for maybe 20 years now, but they're now repeating this: the moment to stop Putin is now. We've got to double down on this war. Now, what seems to be happening is Zelensky and the Ukrainians are really on the back foot, and there's major advances by the Russians. This business about what happened in Kursk, the intervention there, the incursion there of Ukrainian forces, means almost nothing geopolitically, and it's not moving anywhere. And but conversely, the Russians are making major advancements, and they look like they're capturing towns and villages at a much faster pace than they had previously. So now things are escalating. Also, we have a huge Ukrainian shooting into Russia and huge Russian another one attacking its Kyiv, blowing up of electricity. So things are actually still kind of like escalating, and big attempt at hitting Moscow by the Ukrainians recently. So it's really, it's kind of, it's simmering in a dangerous kind of way, but it doesn't look good for the Ukrainians, and the more and more media outlets allied to Zelensky are now even talking about Zelensky being maybe paying a price for that. On the question of Israel and the violence, it's unbelievable what we're seeing. This incursion into the West Bank, biggest in 20 plus years, destruction in Jenin, dozens and dozens of Palestinians killed in the West Bank. And you have the Israeli foreign minister, Israel Katz, basically saying we've got to do to the West Bank what we've been doing in Gaza. This is Israel Katz that Melanie Joly a week ago, 10 days ago, I guess after Hezbollah launched some missiles and blew up targeted Israeli intelligence base and stuff. She had a meeting with Katz and basically expressed solidarity with Katz. And he's basically just, we got a genocide in West Bank like we've been doing in Gaza. And of course, no media connecting those two in the dominant Canadian media. Now, the other thing, of course, over the past 24, 36 hours is that these 6 Israeli hostages the Hamas had captured were killed. Hamas says it was the Israelis that killed them. Israel says it was Hamas that killed them. Both sides, or the Israelis admitting that they were alive until very recently, like just before, I guess the Israelis were in the tunnel or wherever, however that played out. So it seems a little bit odd. I mean, it doesn't seem odd to me. The possibility of the Hamas fighters being given the order that if the Israeli troops are about to get them and you have no option, we prefer you to kill them than to let them get out alive. That has a logic to it. Uh, it doesn't make much sense that they would have held these people for 11 months and then just sort of suddenly one day decided to kind of kill them. That's not sensible. So the whether it was the Israeli forces getting close and that leading to the Hamas operatives killing them, or the Israelis actually killed them, I don't know. But either one, it's the lack of a ceasefire, the Israeli intervention, whatever that leads to them being killed. And that's clearly the opinion. It was fascinating to see this play out, how that's the opinion of a large swath of Israeli society is blaming the government and Netanyahu. Now, the whole question of hostages, I find so unbelievable because there's more than 10,000 Palestinian hostages, and then it's never like referred to it as a hostage, or never even I even find the NDP, I don't even know if you find any NDP MPs that have like referred to the Palestinians, the 100 times more Palestinians that are hostages of Israel. It's just so crass, the double standard, and just so in your face now 11 months later, like as if we care about, like honestly, as if I care about the 100 Israelis who are captured in Gaza. That's a complete footnote in the context of all that's happened. It's a footnote compared to the Palestinians that have been kidnapped. All the evidence is the Palestinians are being treated infinitely worse than the Israelis are, that are held captive, right? There's tons of rape, there's tons of torture. The Israelis that get released, they're basically like they got treated well, like in the most dire circumstances. Clearly, the Hamas is bending over backwards to treat these people like the most kind of like humanely possible, in the context, of course. A number of these people are civilians. Most of them on the left are soldiers, in which case, that's totally legit. To capture soldiers when they're overseeing your imprisonment in the Gaza ghetto, that's a totally legitimate military tactic. But yet our media, it's just remarkable to see this, and like the endless number of Palestinians killed, and then the media just focuses on like the harrowing human story of these 6 individuals. It's absolutely stunning. And the Trudeau's response yesterday was, the murder of 6 Israeli hostages by Hamas terrorists in Gaza is devastating and enraging. Canada stands with the victims' families in your grief. Hamas must release all hostages, lay down its arms, and have no future in the governance of Gaza. Leaders must reach a deal to bring the rest of the hostages home and end the violence. And of course, the hostages home doesn't mean the 10,000 Palestinians who are hostage, who are who were the colonized, who were before they were detained, before they were kidnapped, were the ones that were mistreated. It doesn't count those people. Now, of course, why the Canadian government claiming that Hamas should have no role in future governance of Gaza, it seems like what's its place? Israel should have no role in the governance of Gaza. I think that's pretty straightforward. I think that's what the International Court of Justice just ruled, the highest body of global law. But this is how it plays out, the double standard. And it's just remarkable, really remarkable to see. At McGill, the front page of today's or Saturday's National Post, most of the front page, real big bar, Jews at McGill, we feel alone. And it's a 2-page spread, I think page 8 and 9, 2 full pages. And this big long piece about just how horrible it is for Jewish people at McGill. And in this piece, one of the more incredible things they claim there was a this is a quote, crystal knock themed rally in November, right? They're claiming there was a crystal knock themed rally that student activists organized at McGill in November. I mean, they just literally just pluck it from, from the air. Crystal knock, of course, when the beginning of the Nazis' terror against Jews. And this apparently, according to the CJPME person, this piece got picked up by 73 publications. The Post Media, 73 Post Media publications ran it probably on their websites. Now, there's a lot to unpackage on this McGill thing and the idea of Jews being alone at McGill. First of all, the first thing to state really clearly and not hide from it is that Jews are overrepresented at this prestigious university as students, as faculty. That's clear. There was a look at that in terms of students a few years ago. There also, in terms of the power structure and in terms of, by a large margin, by the donors. If you go around McGill, and so these students claiming we feel alone, and you just start looking at the buildings and libraries named after people, the Bronfman Building, the Sylvan Adams Institute for Sports Science, the Schulich Music School, the Schulich Engineering Library, it goes on and on and on. How many different parts of McGill are named after Jewish donors. You have all these pro-Israel Jewish groups operating on campus. You have Hillel on campus. You have Chabad on campus. You have a Jewish studies department, big Jewish studies department at McGill. In what reasonable world should any Jewish student feel alone at McGill, right? The reality is that Jews at McGill are far overrepresented in positions of power and basically in every major sphere. Maybe not among the cleaning staff, maybe not among the lower ranks of the security, but any sense of power within the institution. And this is what's posted. There was a Jewish Forward piece. The U.S. Jewish publication had a big long piece, more or less saying the same thing, how horrible it is for Jews at McGill. And the president of the University of McGill this week is unbelievable what he did. Deep Saini held a town hall with Holocaust Housefather, Anthony Housefather, supposedly about the safety of Jews returning to campus. In this, it's unbelievable he would host a webinar with Housefather, the biggest advocate for Israel's violence in the House of Commons. In this webinar, the president of McGill says a whole bunch of things. He talks about a huge rise of anti-Semitism, amazing rise of anti-Semitism. He goes on. He threatens professors. According to Canadian Jewish News, I wasn't participating in the webinar. I read the Canadian Jewish News story. He threatens professors, saying they're abuse of their podium. Nobody would be allowed to abuse their position to make a brackets political or hateful statement. Okay, so this is what he's saying, abusing their thing. Then he calls on, apparently, according to the Canadian Jewish News report, calls on Jewish students. I'm quoting here, calling on Jewish students to be the ears on the ground and report any breaches of conduct. So the president of the university is calling on Jewish students to basically spy on professors at this forum hosted by Holocaust Housefather. Unbelievable stuff, really unbelievable stuff. Saini, an activist, a couple days ago, confronted Saini and he loses it on this camera, and they you don't see the full video. I don't know the full video, but what of the images that were posted, I posted on my Twitter. He basically tries to like hit the student. He has to be restrained by his own people because he's clearly on the cusp of like doing something really stupid. The president of the university totally rattled by the student challenging him. And it's remarkable, right? The remarkable. He goes and he gives an op-ed in the Gazette 3 weeks ago where he says, well, it's basically a reaction to the turning the violence on the encampment. And he's like, well, I can't listen to just this minority, this loud minority. Well, back in November, 78.7% of undergraduates, the biggest referendum in the university's undergraduate history, voted for a very strong resolution for divestment. My bet is that number would have increased since then. If you got 78.7 for that vote back then, you probably get 80 some odd. So you got 71, but a bit before, you got 71%. It's going up. And there's a very clear, and I'm not saying it's universal. Not all students are in agreement, but obviously. But there's a very clear way for the university administration to clear up this whole question of who should I listen to, right? Just this vocal minority, as he states, or let's listen to it all. Have a referendum. University, organize a referendum. Have on all undergraduates, graduates, staff, faculty. They all get to vote on a referendum for divestment. Put in a super majority. They can't just. It's not just 50% plus one that gets a divestment, but put in 55, 60, even 2/3, right? Do it. Have the vote. Let's see what happens. I think they, of course, know there's a very good chance, even if you did it 2/3, you get 2/3 of students, undergrads, grads, faculty, and staff that would vote for a divestment vote. The reason they don't do it is because one, you have a situation where probably the most privileged group, let's be frank about it, the most privileged group at McGill is framing that they are alone, right? So, and you have incredible, crazy Zionist donors who, like these, families like the Bronfman family, been in Canada for 100 years, and they're billionaires, and they feel like victims, right? And they are big donors at McGill, and they think there's like this whole big plot against Jewish people at McGill, and they actually believe this stuff, right? They believe it, and so the administration, and I don't believe Saini actually cares. I think he probably agrees with all this. He's a establishment person, but to the extent there are voices or individuals within the McGill administration that don't necessarily just want to see more Palestinian children killed, they're terrified by the donors who are Jewish Zionist donors, are incredibly influential, but then they also are incredibly emboldened because they actually feel like they are victims as they are well, they're setting up, they're forcing the university, they're financing all these relationships. One of the elements about all the relationships between McGill and different Israeli universities, they're almost all financed by prominent Jewish Zionist donors, right? They didn't just fall from the sky, like is sort of kind of implicit in a lot of the response to divestment and breaking relationship with Israeli universities. They were very politicized decisions. The special envoy, Deborah Lyons, she posted an image that Heritage Canada about anti-Semitism, and where she wears these dog tags that are basically IDF dog tags. They technically say free the hostages, but they're replicas of the IDF dog tags, and that was a big controversy online. You have Marco Mendicino, the ferocious Zionist liberal MP, who says criminals who write anti-Semitic garbage like Israelis the new Nazis, as shown here today, deserve to be prosecuted and go to jail. So if you write that Israelis are the new Nazis, that deserves to get thrown in jail, according to the fascist Mendicino. On the CUPE file, That's an interesting one. I talked about it a bunch last week. Fred Hahn has gotten a letter of or a resolution of endorsement for the CUPE Ontario Executive Board. He ain't going anywhere. There was an effort to have a protest. 40 Sija B'nai B'rith organized. Apparently 42 people showed up for this protest. Total failure. There's a good piece in Canada Files showing how it's the big chunk of the background to the story of the CUPE National is they were angry with Fred Hahn's response to this strike, and so it's actually just sort of using the whole anti-Semitism controversy to score points at somebody they were angry with, a more activist-oriented labor leader. And there's also a piece in World Socialist website that goes into some of this stuff. The piece in Canada Files is worth taking a look at. Sarah Jama got listed as the Ontario MPP that was kicked out of the NDP early on in the genocide. She got listed as one of 8 I don't know exact title. I didn't write it down. Like transformative women, and so she got by Elle Canada, and so this was online for I think like 24 hours, and then they just chopped her, and then there was some backlash, and then they edited the author of the story, a Muslim woman, then they took her name off. So Elle Canada did this, gave accolades to Sarah Jama, and like presumably there was either a Zionist pushback or somebody internally realized, and they scrambled. Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East has a story or email about that, the claims about the Iranian influence, the XPOZ organization that claimed that all the McGill encampment was like Iranian thing. It was just really stupid, really, really stupid. It was just based upon Twitter accounts and how many Farsi language Twitter accounts there was talking about the McGill encampment. And even if that were true, that had almost nothing to do with the actual encampment, but they got Pierre Polyev was tweeting out about it. It's totally stupid, really dumb stuff. And Case for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, I don't know anything about this XPOZ group, but they show that this is actually really tied to the Israeli military organization. There's a positive development. Liberal staffers, 52 Liberal staffers, I believe it was, signed this letter saying they won't work for the party on any partisan issues, like specifically this by-election taking place here in Montreal and Verdun, because of their enabling of the Holocaust in Gaza. And they put a couple conditions for why they would return. That's a very good development. The actual Post puts it on the front page the next day or 2 days later, and saying basically just fire all the staffers. But it's good, the Liberal staffers, because one of the things I haven't seen is there's been a whole bunch of State Department and U.S. government officials that have resigned, like a dozen or so, over Gaza, and there was at least one British official, but I haven't heard of any Global Affairs Canada or that have resigned for this. So this is the kind of first and a little bit in that light of liberal staffers taking this position. Now, just to conclude, so there is this important rally. I think we're up to 15 different Canada Revenue Agency offices on International Day of Charity on Thursday. Most of the rallies are happening at noon at CRA offices, and people should plug into that. You can find info on Just Peace Advocates website. The JNF issue is kind of some interesting stuff in that. There's a war that's developed between the JNF and Canadian Jewish News. So Canadian Jewish News did this big, long piece based upon the 358-page Canada Revenue Agency kind of audit backgrounder to JNF that was released. And the Canadian Jewish News piece really kind of like basically shows that JNF was a disaster, like just its books were a disaster. This that they've known about this for a long time. There's been all kinds of processes been going on for like years. Clearly, the CRA has done everything possible to not finally revoke the JNF, right? They were really trying. And JNF was just a disaster in terms of response. Now, the Canadian Jewish News piece very much depoliticizes this whole thing, okay? And it's a big, long piece. Clearly, it's gotten tons of play in Zionist Jewish circles and JNF circles. Clearly, big issue. The JNF put out a formal statement, like a fairly long, like response to the Canadian Jewish News. There's people on online on the CJN's Twitter and stuff saying basically Honest Reporting Canada should do like an email campaign against the Canadian Jewish News for its like, you know, they don't say anti-Semitism, but that's essentially what they're saying, for their bias. Canadian Jewish News is bias against the JNF and whatnot. Now, weirdly enough, in this whole thing, I haven't read the full 358 pages. I read like about 40 or 50 of the pages of the Canadian Jewish News, the Canadian Revenue Agency's revocation kind of reasons to the JNF. I'm actually, interestingly, somewhat sympathetic to the JNF's essential point. And basically, the Canadian Jewish News article really downplays the politics. And the JNF is basically trying to frame it all as a bias against the JNF, and this is all political. And the really important element that's kind of left out of the whole discussion is that the JNF, what essentially seems to me is going on here, is the JNF is a disaster. Its books are a disaster and all this stuff, because most of what it was doing was providing funds, directly or indirectly, to the KKL JNF, which is essentially the JNF Israel. And that's not allowed by, it's a non, what's the terminology the CRA uses? It's I forget the formal terminology they use, but they're not allowed to receive money. That's not permissible according to charity rules. And that's essentially what they're doing. And the why question there is, in part, it's not stated at all by the CRA, but I think is maybe there. It's a racist colonial organization. So they're not letting them fund projects for KKL JNF. And so that's why their books are such a mess, is because they can't show where they're actually sending their money, because so much of the money is going to an organization it's not permissible. But that and so the politics of that, the CJN is downplaying the sort of politics of that. And so anyways, I think it's kind of an interesting, I'm not certain this is correct, but this seems to be sort of there. But the bigger picture, it's very good that the pro-Israel groups are fighting, and they're in this like pretty open battle on this issue. To me, it confirms that the JNF ain't getting its charitable status back, even if they're sort of hoping that maybe in a couple of years they could reapply and stuff. And that seems what they're now shifting towards as a tactic. But I'm thinking that's going to be made more and more difficult by this this battle. And just a point, I made this last week, I believe. I made this point, but I'm going to reiterate this point. And I wrote a piece kind of arguing this out, is that so much of Canada's relationship to Israel, the arms, the enlistment, the Canadians fighting, so much of it is criminal, right? It contravenes current Canadian law, and not to mention contravening international law, but it contravenes current Canadian law. And it seems to me that the CRA is one of the is maybe the domain where the ability to campaign, the independence of the institution, and the ability to have success in pressing it to uphold the law is greater than some of the other institutions. It has a certain degree of independence. And so this campaigning about pressing the CRA to revoke the charitable status of organizations that are funding settlements, that are funding the Israeli military, racist organizations in Israel, that also have dubious books, the possibility of success on that front, I think, is greater maybe than some of the other areas of campaigning. So that's a little bit of a pitch for mobilizing on September 5th. But I invite people to come out to those protests, and I will open it up to questions, comments. Try to keep it to 13 minutes here, and I want to look for Laura here in the. I'm not seeing anyone right now, but I'm going to look for Laura here to co-host. Go ahead, Catherine. And I look for Laura.
Hi, Laura asked me to say something about the protest in Halifax, Chibuktuk, when Trudeau came to speak at the Laurier Club. And I probably will get cut off, so I'll just try to say as much as I can. Yeah, there was a great crowd. The Teamsters were there also for the right to strike, but the group, the Palestinian Solidarity Group, was much louder, more colorful, everything like that. And there was an attempt by there was like two groups chanting our own slogans, which was a shame. There was no solidarity both ways, but there was somebody from Labor for Palestine made a great speech on the megaphone or a microphone that was broadcast really, really clear and loud about the need for solidarity, and and people did try to make the links, but basically the Teamsters weren't interested, maybe one or two, but it was just lovely, this strong sense of togetherness and people standing up for what they believed in. And like at one point somebody said, "Oh, Trudeau's coming in around the back," and a whole crowd of people went around the back, and young people were the ones leading the chants, and the cops came, like they saw us going into the parking lot where the security was trying to stop us, and the cops came, made a line against the back door, and people had just beautiful signs and a whole bunch of different chants. I mean, they're probably similar across the way, but across the country, but it just felt really, really powerful to be part of it. And then of course Trudeau came around the front instead, and and apparently when he spoke, and the chants, just like, I don't know how people kept their voices, because people kept, I had to take a break. But apparently when he left, we had to leave a little early. He does his usual fake smile and wave to people, and people said their piece to him, and a few people chased him as the car went away, I think.
It doesn't matter how like clearly angry and belligerent you are towards him, he will do that smile and
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Catherine, and yay to you guys. That sounded great. Okay, go ahead, Nadia.
Yes, hello. Hi, Eve. Thank you for your presentation. There's just one thing I don't agree with you about when you say that the lives of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, don't matter. I do agree with you that the reporting is biased towards the Palestinians. I do agree that but to say that the lives don't count, and of course
I didn't say that. I said it's a footnote. I think I used the word as a footnote in both with regards to the big picture of what's happened in Gaza, and even on the question of actual hostages. That's what I'm not saying. They don't matter. Obviously they matter to all their families and people.
And of course, we should be very proud of the way that those who came out of the hostage, those who were released, said very good things about the way they were treated, and that's something to be proud of, you know. So I believe that all lives matter, no matter how evil the country is, no matter how horrible the Netanyahu government is, and the whole ideology behind what they're doing is horrible and barbaric, but still all lives matter.
That's true. Yeah, I think we'd all agree with that. Okay, thanks, Nadia. Okay, Eve, Yuri, sorry. Yeah, now I'm confusing you too. Go ahead, Yuri.
Yeah, we both have the letter Y in our names, so happens sometimes. Well, Eve, it's great to be back here. I've been sick for like the past couple of weeks, and I was also traveling, so I didn't get the chance to catch all of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. One question I wanted to ask you about Israel and the whole hostage. Isn't it safe to say, though, because I think I probably should do a research on this, or somebody should definitely do a research on this, but haven't most of the hostages that have been killed, they've actually not been even killed by Hamas, they've been killed by Israel itself in their supposed claim of trying to rescue the hostages, and which I think is also why that's fueling even more protests and making the current far right government led by Netanyahu and Likud unpopular. So I'm curious your response on that, and then with regards to the whole Brian Mulroney and Canada were such great friends to South Africa, which they weren't. I know you and Pizza sourced. I think her name was Linda Freeman, who did a book about how both Pierre Trudeau and Brian Mulroney were not the great champions of anti-apartheid and stuff like that. And I'm just curious, has anything in like CBC or anything in Canadian media, like have they at least like asked her or like cited her out that like or is it just too much of an inconvenience shoot that has to be suppressed?
Yeah, Linda Friedman has a book called Ambiguous Champion, something like Pierre Trudeau and Brian Mulroney, something South Africa. I forget it, but it's Ambiguous Champion. It's not the only one. It's a big book. It's like 600 pages, a big like academic. There's a one or two others. Tomlinson, I think is maybe last name. Had one from like maybe published, and Ambiguous Champion was published in like 90. It's sort of after. I think it's like late 90s. It's published, but Joanne Naiman, who's an activist, prominent anti-apartheid activist in Toronto in the 70s and 80s. She was actually kind of critical of Linda Freeman. She said that she was more of like a bit more of like a kind of a liberal opponent of apartheid. So probably her book is too soft on the Canadian government. That would have been Joanne Naiman's. Wasn't engaged in the activism, so I'm not certain about that. But her book makes it very clear how much support there was from Canadian government towards South Africa. But yeah, the media, it gets mentioned a little bit here and there, but no, mostly that's the point. My point in citing that Le Devoir passage is it's just like thrown in there in this piece. It's just like the accepted wisdom that Brian Mulroney was like, pretty much in the bush fighting with the ANC against right, like that's just accepted wisdom now out in the Canadian media. And so it's I don't know, like what do you say to, like, you just I try to respond to it every time I can, when, like, I responded to Melanie Joly making that claim. Unfortunately, South African officials seem pretty interested in perpetuating that. They seem fine with. They don't seem to see any, their self-interest in challenging that. But yeah, on the hostage question, I mean, you don't know, right? Like this is war, and everyone's lying and everyone's saying what serves their purposes. The Israelis have successfully released like 8, something like that. It's a very small number. There was the one operation where they released. They get was it 3 or 4, and they killed 250 or so Palestinians, and I believe they 1 or 2 Israeli soldiers were killed, and 2 or 3 other hostages were killed, I believe. In that one, if or that Hamas was at least claiming that. You don't know that, but for certain. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that Israel's fighting in Gaza to release the hostages, like it made no sense. Hamas offered to release all of the hostages immediately the first couple of days after October 7th if Israel didn't enter. I just saw that posted again in Times of Israel story saying that. The idea that Israel's fighting in Gaza to release the hostages, which is what is still presented by like our politicians, right? That's still kind of like implicitly the idea that that's happening is just so fanciful and like insane. But that's kind of still out there. So, but yeah, it's really hard to know exactly what, we don't even know exactly how many there are alive, or how many are dead. And then of course the bigger question is that how many, we don't even know exactly how many Palestinians have been kidnapped by Israel and all the details on that stuff. But
okay, go ahead, Anne.
Oh, hi. Thank you. I'd just like to thank you, Eve, and everyone. I'd like to return to Histadrut in Israel calling for a strike. I'm pretty sure you've written about it, but and maybe it's well known to everyone in this group, but their history in terms of major players in Zionism, and I wonder if you would want to comment on that briefly.
Yeah, it's the main trade union federation, which has been excluded Palestinians, Arabs early on for decades and decades. Totally racist. It's that's changed a little bit in terms of its explicit racism. Like the rationale for the strike. I mean, it's all like Jewish supremacy is just kind of forms all of the discussion here, right? That the rationale for the general strike is not to stop killing in Gaza. It's to have a ceasefire, not because you don't want another 10, 20, however many thousand Palestinians killed, and you don't want however many more polio cases or however many more malnutrition and how many more, on and on and on and on disease for Palestinians. It's to have a ceasefire to get the Israelis back, right? That's what it's, so in the here and now, we obviously have to be happy that Israeli and supportive of the Israeli society calling for a ceasefire and rattling the fanatical Netanyahu government. But their politics are, totally racist, are completely militaristic, Zionistic, Jewish supremacist, whatever exactly you wanna call it. And so yeah, but I guess from the Canadian, one element of the Canadian thing is that Canadian unions, Histadrut officials would be at the Canadian Labour Congress and its predecessors' conventions all the time. So there was usually there would be U.S. representatives, which made a lot of sense because Canadian unions were heavily U.S. unions. There would often be British union representatives, and then there would be Histadrut. And that was like the norm until the, I think, the late 80s. And so there was tons of really deep ties between Canadian labor and the Histadrut, even while I can't remember exactly when the Histadrut changes its explicitly racist membership rules. But there were certainly ties between Canadian labor and the Histadrut throughout that period. It was very powerful. It's not very powerful anymore. Obviously, labor Zionism was really important for a long time. That's not the case anymore. So it's not that powerful an institution in Israeli society, but it owned large swaths of the Israeli economy for many, many years. But yeah, so it's probably it's the better end of the Zionist institutions, but it's still very much a Zionist institution that's anti-Palestinian.
Okay, I think that's it, Eve. I think we can let you go to your children. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks everyone. Have a good night.